In childhood, I ran away from home due to my parents' cruel treatment and was adopted by a stranger. When I grew up, they sued me and claimed that my company wasn't mine. Although I'm unsure of where to begin, it seems best to start at the beginning. My name is Mike, and I was born into a marriage that likely should never have existed. My early memories are a blur of confusion and darkness. These themes seem to have been the backdrop of my entire childhood. As a child, I never felt like I belonged. My parents, Jane and Robert, were not meant to raise a child. Jane was a cold, distant woman who seemed to view me as more of a nuisance than a son. Robert wasn't much better. He was usually either buried in his work or drowning in alcohol. And when he was present, he was full of rage. Someone had to bear the brunt of that anger. My mother made it very clear that she never wanted children. Her dreams were far removed from the chaotic and noisy reality of motherhood. She couldn't undo the mistake that was me, but she made sure I was aware of it. My upbringing was shaped not just by neglect, but by outright hostility. It wasn't just that my parents didn't care about me, they actively resented me. I was their anchor, their burden. My earliest memories are filled with objects being thrown, shouting matches, and spending nights curled up under my bed, trying to escape the storm brewing in the next room. There is one night that still haunts me, a memory that sends shivers down my spine. I must have been around 4 or 5 years old, and I did something, though I can't recall what that made them furious. I only remember the aftermath, the sound of shattering glass, the feeling of cold water on my skin, and the searing pain that followed. The glass my father threw at me cut into my flesh. I cried not just from the pain, but from the shock. My mother didn't rush to help, she just looked at me with disgust. "Stop crying," she sneered. "You're so weak." That night I learned not to cry, not to show any sign of weakness. That was the night I started building the walls that would keep the world, and them, out. School wasn't much better. If home was a battlefield, school was a minefield. I was the odd kid, the one who never spoke, the one whose parents couldn't even bother to buy him new clothes. The way the teachers looked at me was a mix of pity and exasperation, as if I were a problem they couldn't solve. I was always alone at recess, pretending to read a book while the other kids played and laughed. But they didn't leave me alone. No, they made sure I always knew I wasn't like them, that I didn't belong. One kid in particular, Billy, seemed to take it upon himself to make my life as miserable as possible. He was bigger and stronger than me, and he knew how to use it. It started with the usual things: name-calling, shoving me in the hallways, but it quickly escalated. After school, he would corner me and taunt me, daring me to fight back. But I never did. What else could I do but take it? Then there was that day when Billy decided to raise the stakes. I think it was a Thursday. He and his gang cornered me in the bathroom again, but this time, he didn't just push me or call me names. This time he pulled out a lighter. "Want to see something cool?" he asked with a grin. I didn't answer. I just stood there frozen as he flicked the lighter on and off. The small flame flickered in the dim light, sending a chill down my spine. "Scared, Mikey?" he sneered. "Gonna cry?" I didn't cry. I didn't say a word, but inside I was screaming. Suddenly he lunged at me, grabbing my arm and bringing the lighter dangerously close to my skin. I felt the heat, the pain, but I didn't fight back. I just stood there, waiting for it to be over. When he finally let go, I ran. I ran all the way home, my arm raw and burnt. But when I got there, no one was home, no one cared. Not even my parents noticed. Billy wasn't the only one. There were other kids, other teachers who made my life a nightmare. I was the punching bag, the scapegoat. One teacher in particular, Mrs. Simmons, seemed to take pleasure in humiliating me more than others. She would call on me in class, knowing I didn't know the answer, and then mock me when I got it wrong. "You're never going to amount to anything, Mike," she would say with disdain. "Why do you even bother coming to school?" I had no response. I didn't have a response for anyone. I was just trying to survive. But the wounds weren't just physical or emotional. It was the secrets that hurt the most. The things that happened in the dark, when no one else was around. The things I couldn't tell anyone, even if I wanted to. There was a man my parents knew. He would come over sometimes, usually when my father was too drunk to care. He would take me down to the basement, away from prying eyes, and do things to me that no child should ever experience. I tried to tell my mother once. I told her what he made me do, but she didn't believe me. She slapped me across the face, and told me to stop making up stories. I never tried to tell anyone again after that. I learned to blend in, to keep my head down, to keep my mouth shut. I became a ghost in my own life, unseen. The only way I could survive was to stop caring, to stop feeling. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the darkness that seemed to follow me everywhere. It was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume me. I was about 11 years old when something inside me finally snapped. I came home from school after yet another fight with Billy, bruised and bleeding. My mother was sitting in the living room watching TV and smoking a cigarette. I tried to sneak past her, hoping she wouldn't notice me, but she did. "What the hell happened to you?" she demanded, her voice sharp and cold. "Nothing," I mumbled, keeping my eyes down. "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "Who did this to you?" I didn't answer. I just stood there staring at the floor, my hands clenched at my sides. "I'm talking to you, Mike," she screamed, grabbing my arm and yanking me around to face her. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the years of abuse, the constant pain, the humiliation. Maybe it was just the sight of her, so cold and unfeeling, that pushed me over the edge. But I lost it in that moment. I pushed her, hard. For a moment, I thought I had won as she staggered back, shock on her face. But then her expression changed, and I knew I had made a terrible mistake. She came at me, fists flying, screaming that I was worthless, that she wished I had never been born, that I was a mistake. She beat me, called me every name she could think of, but I didn't fight back. I just let her hit me. I didn't care anymore. When she finally stopped, too exhausted to continue, she just stood there panting, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and something that looked like fear. "Get out of my sight," she hissed. "I never want to see you again." I didn't argue. I just turned and left the house, walking out into the cold night. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I wandered for hours, my body aching, my mind numb. I eventually found myself at the park, the one place I had always felt safe. It was late and the park was empty, the playground bathed in the dim light of the moon. I sat on the swings, staring up at the sky, wondering how my life had come to this. How had I become so lost, so broken? Was there any way out of the darkness, or was I doomed to live my life in the shadows? I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought. But eventually I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see a stranger, but it was Billy. He approached me, alone, a smug grin on his face. I didn't move. I just sat there, waiting to see what he would do. He stopped in front of me and sneered. "You look like crap, Mike. What's the matter? Did your parents finally have enough of you?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him, my eyes empty, my heart hollow. He must have seen something in my face that made him pause, because he didn't hit me. He just stood there, staring at me, his grin fading. "You're pathetic," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're not even worth it." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the darkness. I don't know how long I stayed there after he left. Maybe hours. But eventually I got up and started walking again, with no destination in mind. I ended up at the train tracks, on the edge of town. I stood there, staring at the tracks, wondering if it would be easier just to end it all, to step onto the tracks and let the train take me away from all the pain and the darkness. But I didn't do it. There was a small spark of life left in me, something that kept me from taking that final step. So I turned away from the tracks and started walking back home. When I got there, the house was dark and quiet. My parents hadn't waited up for me, or maybe they just didn't care enough to. I tiptoed inside, careful not to make a sound, and went to my room. I lay on my bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. I was just empty. That night I realized that I was truly alone, that no one in the world cared about me, and that if I disappeared, no one would notice. But I survived that night, and I kept surviving because it was all I knew how to do. I became an expert at disappearing, at blending in, at hiding. I learned how to navigate the minefield that was my life, dodging the explosions and taking the hits when I couldn't avoid them. I numbed myself to the pain, to the fear, to the loneliness. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the darkness that had taken root inside me. It was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume me. And sometimes, late at night, when everything was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I would wonder if it would be easier just to let it. When I look back on that cold night in the park, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed. I was at my lowest point, with nowhere to go and nothing to live for. But then, I met Sam Watson, and everything changed in ways I never could have imagined. Sam was different from anyone I had ever known, kind, patient, and gentle. He didn't push or pry, but he showed me a kindness and understanding that I had never experienced before. At first, I refused his offer to come to his home out of habit and fear. But eventually, hunger and exhaustion won out, and I accepted. Sam's home was small and unassuming, tucked away on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the house I grew up in. No angry voices, no tension in the air. Instead, it smelled of freshly brewed coffee and wood. It was a home, something I had never really known. That night, I slept in a bed that was mine, in a room that was mine. I had never had a room of my own before. I had never known what it was like to feel safe, to not have to worry about someone breaking in, about the next beating, about the next cruel word. It was like stepping into a new world. Over the next few days, Sam slowly began to draw me out of the shell I had built around myself. He introduced me to books, and I found solace in the stories, escaping into tales of adventure and hope that helped me forget the darkness for a while. He taught me about trust, about the importance of caring for others without expecting anything in return. And slowly, I began to heal. Sam also saw potential in me, something no one else had ever seen. He encouraged me to go back to school, to finish my education, and to dream of a life beyond the one I had known. I was hesitant, even afraid, but with his support, I took the leap. Going back to school was hard. I was years behind my classmates, both academically and emotionally. The thought of sitting in a classroom with teenagers who were years ahead of me was terrifying. But Sam was there every step of the way. He helped me catch up, worked with me on my assignments, and encouraged me when I wanted to give up. Over time, school became more than just a place to learn. It became a place where I began to discover who I was. In my senior year, I met Jessica and Tyler, who would become my closest friends. Jessica was bright and full of energy, with a smile that could light up a room. Tyler was quieter, but loyal and kind. They were the first people my age who saw me as a friend, not as an outsider or a freak. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared our hopes and fears, and dreamed about a future that suddenly seemed within reach. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a future worth living. At 15, I officially became Sam's adopted son. I still remember the day we went to court together. When the judge asked if I wanted Sam to be my father, I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I was overwhelmed with emotion as the adoption was finalized. For the first time in my life, I had a father, someone who wanted me, who chose me. It was a simple ceremony, but it meant the world to me. After graduation, Jessica, Tyler, and I decided to go to college together. We spent months preparing, visiting campuses, filling out applications, and planning for the future. When we were all accepted to the same university, it felt like a dream come true. University was a fresh start, a place where no one knew my past. I threw myself into my studies, determined to succeed. But college also brought new challenges, ones I hadn't anticipated. At first, everything seemed perfect. Tyler and I shared a dorm, and Jessica lived just down the hall. We took classes together, joined clubs, made new friends. It felt like the world was ours. But as the semesters passed, the pressure began to build. There were the late nights, the endless assignments, the constant stress of trying to keep up. Most people were supportive, but there were others who saw me as an easy target. It started with small things, snide comments here and there, jokes about my background, about how I didn't fit in. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my friends and my studies. But the comments kept coming, and with each passing week, they grew more vicious. There was a group of students who seemed to take pleasure in making my life difficult. They were rich, privileged kids who had never known hardship. The leader of the group, a guy named Jason, was arrogant and entitled. He made it his mission to remind me that I was different, that I wasn't one of them. The harassment escalated quickly. My textbooks went missing. My assignments were accidentally deleted from my computer. My dorm room was trashed more than once. But the breaking point came one night when I returned to my room to find it completely destroyed. my belongings strewn everywhere. Ink poured over my notes. The anger and helplessness I had buried for years bubbled up inside me. I was done being the victim. I was done letting them win. The next day, I confronted Jason and his friends in the courtyard. I don't remember everything I said, but I remember the feeling like a dam bursting, all the pain and rage of years spilling out in a torrent. I tore into them with words I didn't know I had, exposing their weaknesses and insecurities until they were the ones crumbling under the pressure. By the time I was done, they were on their knees, crying, begging for forgiveness. And I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, not victory or satisfaction, but as if a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. After that, no one bothered me again. But the experience left me shaken, a reminder that the darkness inside me was still there, waiting to be unleashed. That's when I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I had to confront my past and deal with the pain I had buried for so long. I couldn't keep hiding it. Sam was a rock during that time. When I told him what had happened, he didn't judge me or lecture me. He just listened, offering his unwavering support. He knew better than anyone the burden of a traumatic past, and he helped me channel my anger into something productive. At Sam's suggestion, I started seeing a therapist who helped me work through the trauma I had buried for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wanted to give up, but slowly I began to heal. I learned to control my emotions, to forgive myself, to let go of the anger that had defined me for so long. University wasn't all bad, though. There were moments of pure joy, of laughter and happiness that I had never experienced before. Jessica, Tyler, and I became inseparable, our bond growing stronger with each passing year. We supported each other through our struggles, celebrated each other's successes, and dreamed about the future we would build together. In our senior year, we all started thinking seriously about our futures. Jessica landed an internship at a prestigious newspaper, fulfilling her lifelong dream of becoming a journalist. Tyler, who had a passion for technology, began working on an app that quickly attracted investors. As for me, I had discovered a love for finance, channeling my need for structure and control into something positive. As graduation approached, we started making plans. We found a small apartment in the city and decided to live together while we figured out our next steps. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it felt like the start of something new and exciting. Graduation day was surreal. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I had never felt such a sense of pride. I had made it. I had survived everything life had thrown at me and come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and ready to face the world. After graduation, things moved quickly. Jessica's internship turned into a full-time job, and she quickly gained recognition as an up-and-coming journalist. Tyler's app took off, attracting significant investment, and he started his own software company. As for me, I joined a top financial firm, throwing myself into the work with a passion I never knew I had. But life after college wasn't without its challenges. The corporate world was cutthroat, and the stress and pressure were immense. There were times when I felt like I was drowning, even with Sam and my friends by my side. One of the most shocking events after graduation happened about a year later. I was working late one night when I got a call from Tyler. I had never heard him sound so scared. "You need to come to the office, Mike," he said, his voice trembling. "It's Jessica." My heart dropped. I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my coat and rushed to Tyler's office. When I arrived, I found Jessica sitting on the floor of the conference room, tears streaming down her face. She was clutching a letter in her shaking hands. "What's going on?" I asked, hurrying to her side. Tyler handed me the letter, his face grim. It was from the newspaper where Jessica worked, informing her that her department was being shut down effective immediately. She was being let go. "It's all falling apart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything I've worked for." I didn't know what to say. Jessica had poured everything into her career, and now it was being taken away from her. I held her as she cried, while Tyler paced the room, his anxiety clear. In the days that followed, we rallied around Jessica, supporting her as she dealt with the shock and uncertainty. She fell into a deep depression, struggling to find meaning after losing the job that had defined her. But we didn't let her fall. Just as Sam had always been there for us, we were there for her. It took a long time, but Jessica eventually found her footing again. She started doing freelance work, writing for smaller publications, slowly rebuilding her career. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks along the way, but she persevered. And all the while our friendship remained strong, a constant in a world that was always changing. As for me, I continued to climb the corporate ladder, earning promotions and recognition along the way. But no matter how successful I became, I never forgot where I came from or the people who had helped me get there. One day, while visiting Sam, I had a moment of clarity. We were sitting in his living room talking about work, when he looked at me with that same patient, understanding gaze he had the day we met. "You've done well for yourself, Mike," he said, pride in his voice. "But don't forget to take a step back sometimes. Life isn't just about success. It's about the people you share it with." His words stuck with me. I had become so focused on my career, on proving to myself and the world that I was worth something, that I'd lost sight of what really mattered. That's when I realized I needed to find balance, to make time for the people I loved. And that's what I tried to do in the years that followed. I spent more time with Sam, who was getting older but was still as wise and kind as ever. I made sure to stay in touch with Jessica and Tyler, even as our lives began to take different paths. We still lived together, but work often kept us apart, and I worried that we might drift away from each other. Then, something happened that shook us all. Tyler's company, the one he had poured his heart and soul into, was the target of a hostile takeover. It was sudden, brutal, and it left him reeling. "They're going to take everything," he said one night, his voice hollow. "Everything I've worked for, gone." I had never seen Tyler look so defeated, so lost. He had always been the strong one, the one we could all rely on. But now it was him who needed help. Just as we had rallied around Jessica when she lost her job, Jessica and I stood by Tyler as he faced this new challenge. We spent countless hours strategizing, trying to figure out how to stop the takeover, but it felt like we were fighting a losing battle. In the end, the takeover happened, and Tyler was forced out of the company he had built. It was a devastating blow, and for a while it seemed like he might never recover. But Tyler was stronger than he realized. With our support, he picked himself up, dusted himself off, and started again. He used the money from the takeover to start a smaller, more ethical company, and slowly, he found success again. As the years went by, life continued to throw challenges our way. But through it all, we remained a family, a team. We supported each other through the tough times, celebrated each other's victories, and faced every challenge together. Looking back, I realized that Sam didn't just save my life that day in the park, he gave me a life worth living. He showed me what it meant to be loved, to be valued, to have hope for the future. And for that, I will always be grateful. As I sit here and reflect on everything that has happened, I am filled with a sense of pride. I've come a long way from the scared, broken kid I once was. I've built a life I never could have imagined, surrounded by people I love and who love me in return. But with success comes attention, and not all of it good. After years of rebuilding, of overcoming obstacles with resilience, and turning failure into triumph, I had made a name for myself in the world. I had a thriving career, wonderful friends, and a future I was excited about. But just when I thought I had finally left the past behind, the ghosts of my past came back to haunt me in the most unexpected way. It all started with a phone call I never expected to receive. I was in my office reviewing some reports when my assistant buzzed in. "Mike, there's someone on the line claiming to be your parents," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't seen or spoken to Jane and Robert in years, not since the day I left their house and found refuge with Sam. They had made it clear that I meant nothing to them, and I had spent my life trying to forget they ever existed. "Put them through," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. There was a click, and then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Mike," my mother's voice cracked over the line. "It's been a long time." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know what to say, or if I even wanted to say anything at all. "We need to talk," she continued, her tone more like a command than a request. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "It's about the company," she replied, and I could hear the greed in her voice. "We're your parents, and we've heard that you've done well for yourself. We deserve a share of what you've built." I clenched my fist under the desk, a slow, burning anger rising within me. The audacity. After everything they had done, after all the pain and suffering they had caused, they had the nerve to think they were entitled to anything from me? You're entitled to nothing, I replied, my voice cold as ice. You're not my parents. You stopped being my parents the day you abandoned me. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then my father's voice, slurred and unsteady, came through. He was drunk. Well, that's not very nice, he muttered. Listen to me, boy, he snarled. We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. You owe us. I could feel my anger rising, the memories of every insult, every beating flashing through my mind. You didn't raise me, I shot back. You abused me. You neglected me. You are nothing to me. There was a brief silence, and then my mother's voice returned, this time with a hint of venom. We'll see about that, she hissed. We'll see what the courts have to say. You can't just walk away from your family, Mike. We're going to get what we deserve, and you owe us. The line went dead, and I sat there, seething with anger and disbelief. I had always known my parents were toxic, but this was a new low, even for them. I tried to ignore the issue for a few days, focusing on my work and the life I had built. But a week later, an official letter arrived, cold, impersonal, and threatening. My parents were suing me for a share of my company, claiming they were entitled to a portion as my biological parents. It was then that I realized this wasn't going away. They weren't just after my money. They wanted to drag me back into the darkness, to tear down everything I had worked so hard to build. But I wasn't that scared, helpless kid anymore. I wasn't going to let them win. The first step was to get a good lawyer. I knew exactly who to call. I had made enough connections over the years. I reached out to Sarah Johnson, a tough, no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom. We had met a few years earlier at a charity event, and I knew she was the person I needed in my corner. Sarah was tall and commanding, with a presence that demanded attention. As I explained the situation, her expression grew more serious with each word. They don't have a leg to stand on, Mike, she said when I finished. But that doesn't mean they won't try to drag this out and make your life miserable in the process. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. Sarah, I've been through worse. I just want to make sure they don't get a single penny. She gave me a tight smile. Then let's make sure they don't. The case moved quickly through the courts. My parents had hired a cheap lawyer, a man named Jack Lawson, clearly out of desperation. Jack was a sleazy character with a history of taking on and losing cases no one else would touch. He wasn't much of a threat, though I knew better than to underestimate anyone in a legal battle. Sarah and I went over every detail of the case, preparing for the worst. She helped me gather evidence from my childhood, old police reports, medical records, even statements from neighbors who had witnessed the abuse. It wasn't easy to dredge up those memories, but I knew it was necessary if I wanted to win. We also took a calculated risk. Sarah made Jack an offer. It was more of a bribe, really, though we didn't call it that. The deal was simple. If he agreed to deliberately botch the case, we would compensate him. Considering his reputation and the likely meager pay my parents were offering, it didn't take much to convince him. Are you sure this is the right move? I asked Sarah, feeling uneasy about the plan. Mike, this isn't about justice, she replied, her gaze steady. It's about winning. If this means the difference between losing everything and keeping what's rightfully yours, it's worth it. With Jack on our side, the trial became less of a battle and more of a formality. But that didn't make it easy. Walking into that courtroom, seeing my parents sitting there, smug and confident, was like reliving a nightmare. Their faces were lined with bitterness, but their eyes still held the same hatred I remembered from my childhood. The judge was a woman named Judge Amelia Brooks, known for her no-nonsense approach and impartiality. She was in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. From the moment she entered the courtroom, I knew she wouldn't tolerate any nonsense. Jack opened the trial by presenting my parents' case. It was pathetic, really. He stumbled over his words, presented no compelling evidence, and even contradicted himself several times. It was clear he was phoning it in, and Judge Brooks' patience was wearing thin. When it was Sarah's turn, she took command of the courtroom with the same firm presence she had in her office. She laid out the evidence of my parents' abuse and neglect with startling clarity, methodically presenting the facts. She didn't hold back, detailing the physical and emotional trauma I had endured, the nights I spent in fear, the years of psychological torment. As she spoke, I watched the smug expressions on my parents' faces slowly fade. They hadn't expected this. They had thought they could bully and intimidate me just as they had when I was a child. But now the truth was out, and everyone could see it. When Sarah called me to the stand, I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. This was my moment, my chance to finally tell my story, to face the people who had tried to destroy me. I took a deep breath and looked out at the courtroom, meeting my parents' gaze. "I'm not here for revenge," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to tell the truth." I recounted the horrors of my childhood, the beatings, the neglect, the constant fear. I talked about the day I left, the day I found Sam, and how he had saved me from a life of despair. I told them how I had worked tirelessly to build something of my own, to make a life worth living. And then I told them why I would never give my parents a single cent of what I had earned. "They didn't raise me," I said, my voice growing stronger. "They tried to break me. They didn't care whether I lived or died. And now, after all these years, they think they can just walk back into my life and take what I've built. But they're wrong. They are not my parents. They are just people I was born to, and they are entitled to nothing." When I finished, there was a silence in the courtroom. Judge Brooks looked at me with a hint of respect in her eyes, and I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had said what needed to be said, and I had no regrets. In her closing argument, Sarah left no room for doubt. "Mike owes these people nothing," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "They abused him, abandoned him, and now they are trying to profit from his success. But the law is on Mike's side, and I trust this court will see the truth for what it is." The judge called for a brief recess before delivering her verdict. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest, as my parents whispered angrily to each other. I could see the fear in their eyes now. They were realizing they had misjudged me, that they were losing. When Judge Brooks returned, the courtroom fell silent. She looked at my parents with a cold, hard gaze before delivering her judgment. "After reviewing all the evidence, it is clear that the plaintiffs have no legitimate claim to the defendant's assets," she said. "The overwhelming evidence presented by the defense paints a picture of a young man who has overcome unimaginable adversity. The plaintiffs, on the other hand, have shown nothing but greed and a complete lack of remorse for their actions." Turning to me, she added, "Mike, you have shown remarkable strength and resilience in the face of adversity. This court commends you for your achievements and hopes that you can now move forward, free from the burdens of the past." And with that, she dismissed the case. It was over. I had won. But it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal one. I had faced my demons, stood up to my parents, and come out the other side stronger than ever. As I walked out of the courtroom, Sarah by my side, she smiled at me with genuine pride. "You did great, Mike," she said. "I'm proud of you." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. "Thanks, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without you." Outside the courthouse, I caught one last glimpse of my parents. They stood on the steps, looking defeated and lost in their own misery. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity for them, but it was fleeting. They were finally facing the consequences of the choices they had made. I didn't say anything to them as I walked past. I didn't need to. I had said everything I needed to in that courtroom. The victory was bittersweet, but it was a victory nonetheless. I returned to my life, to my friends, to the career I had spent my life building, and for the first time, I felt like I could finally put the past behind me. When I got home, Sam was waiting for me, his eyes full of pride. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug, but I knew he understood. The trial was over, and I felt like I could finally start living the life he had always wanted for me, the life he had always believed I deserved. In the months that followed, I threw myself back into my work, determined to keep building the life I had fought so hard to achieve. The business continued to grow, and so did my sense of fulfillment and purpose. I stayed close to Jessica, and Tyler, our bond was stronger than ever after everything we had been through together. There were still challenges, there always are in life, but I faced them with a new sense of confidence. I had faced my darkest moments, and I had survived. And I knew that whatever came next, I would be ready.